I saw some paper. Someone said a quote from our Secretary of State, or yeah, our outgoing Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, had a speech apparently today about the Middle East, what's going on in Israel and Gaza. And the quote, that it was just a headline, I didn't read the article. The headline said, quote, Blinken said that the U.S. assesses that Hamas has recruited just as many new fighters as they have lost.
Ugh.
And I couldn't help myself but think, you're talking about, according to Israeli estimates, at least 15,000 Hamas members that have been killed since October 7th. And you mean to tell me that 15,000 new people signed up to join this terrorist organization?
Okay.
You got to ask yourself, what type of civilization can breed 15,000 people that are ready to sign up for this type of service? And yeah, it's very, very troublesome and gets a person angry to think that there are groups in the world, parts of civilization, that will train their young men to sign up for such death and destruction. That has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about, but I just saw the headline today, and I thought that was quite alarming for people that give too much credit, I'm going to say, give too much credit to the local Gaza population. Because there's no healthy population that would ever be able to produce 15,000 terrorists in such a short span of time during an active war, where officially, according to all of the world reports over the last 16 months, everyone has been starving to death. 2 million people died of death from starvation, but they are still alive and also have the ability to sign up for killing people. It's just unbelievable, the world that we live in today. But that's just a introduction that has no connection to what we're going to be talking about. So let's begin. Maybe it has what to do. It for sure has what to do. But we begin Chumash Shmois, the book of Exodus, and it's a story in the beginning that we're all familiar very well from the story of the Haggadah, from Pesach, from the Seder. We have a holiday. So these next few portions, Shmois, Ve'era, Boy, B'Shalach, the first 4 portions of the book of Exodus are the most well-known portions in the Torah, because we have a whole holiday that surrounds itself about these 4, about going down to Egypt, the persecution in Egypt, and the plagues in Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, all the way leading through the splitting of the sea. So we're very familiar, or more familiar, with this part of the Torah than we are with most other parts of the Torah. So let's begin. Simple reading over here. Exodus chapter 1, verse number 5. This is where the story begins. There was a new king who stood up in Egypt, Asher lo yadas Yosef, who did not know Joseph. Now, there's a disagreement over here. Was it an actual new king? Did the old Pharaoh die and they appointed a new Pharaoh? Or was it the same old Pharaoh, but he made himself into a new king? In other words, he changed his own ways. He changed his way of dealing with everybody. So either way, this Pharaoh said to his nation, he said, behold, look, the nation of Israel's descendants are more numerous and stronger than we are. And what do they call this? They call this the modern day, they call it the great replacement theory, I think, correct? That's what they call it. Nothing new under the sun. So we have a problem. Come, let us deal shrewdly with these people. Maybe they're going to increase. And will be when we go to war. And they'll fight against us. And they will be victorious. And they'll drive us away from our own land. They'll take over this country. This is the worry. So what they did was they appointed over them tax collectors to afflict them with heavy, heavy burdens. But even our Miskas Faris, in other words, from here the Jewish people went from being ordinary citizens to becoming laborers for the government. They had strict quotas, that they taxed them so heavily that it would be impossible for them to ever cause an uprising and go to war against the Egyptians. Says the Torah, verse 12, and as they afflicted the Jews, so the Jewish people were fruitful, we increased, and we multiplied by Israel, and we spread out. And what happened was the Egyptians were disgusted from the Jewish people. So so they dealt the Jewish people now with crushing, backbreaking labor. They really bittered their lives with difficult work. That's the first part of it. Now we have the second part. Verse 15. Now the Egyptian king calls in the Jewish midwives. And he tells them as follows. I'm sorry. One's name was Shifra, and one's name was Pua. Shifra and Pua. Yeah? And he says, when the Jewish women will give birth, and you're going to see them on the birthing stool. If they give birth to a son, what should you do? And you should kill him. And if it's a girl, you should let him live. Why did the Pharaoh say this? Why did the Pharaoh only have what against the Jewish boys? Why do you want to kill the Jewish males, not the females?
They can go into the army.
Cut down on the population. But it would seem that you want the men to work if they're slaves.
So why would he say get rid of his future slaves? So the explanation is because the Egyptian stargazers told him that the Jewish people there's going to be a redeemer born to the Jewish people. A Jewish boy is going to be born, and he's going to save the Jewish people. So the Pharaoh said there's a simple solution to that. Kill the boys. That way there won't be any boy born to the Jews that will rise. So this was a rule against the boys, specifically against the boys. However, the Torah says, the midwives were God-fearing. And they did not listen to what the Pharaoh told them. And they kept alive the boys. Now you can imagine, the Pharaoh tells you kill the boys. If you don't kill the boys, what happens? He'll kill you. Very simple. He'll kill you. So the Egyptian king calls in the midwives. And he tells them, why are you doing this? Why are you letting the boys live? So what's the response? The midwives respond to the Pharaoh, and they say like this: Jewish women are not like Egyptian women. The Jewish women are choyos. We'll see in a second what that means, but there's two interpretations. Let's go with the interpretation. It means that they're skilled, as he says here. They're skilled. Before the midwives get there, they already give birth. So what do you want from us? And God sees very good in these midwives. And the Torah says a statement that the people multiplied and became very, very strong. And it was when, as the midwives feared God, and God provided for them bottom. What is it? Bias literally means houses. God provided for them houses. Says the Torah next. Next, God, the Pharaoh commands the entire nation, meaning even the non-Jews. Every boy that's born today has to be thrown into the Nile. And all the girls you can live. Why did he say that? In other words, even the Egyptian boys have to be born, because they told them that it's going to happen today. Till now, it was going to happen in the future, but now it's going to happen today, and we're not sure whether we'll be born to a Jewish family, maybe we'll be born to an Egyptian family. We don't know. So therefore, the Pharaoh said, all boys today have to be thrown into the water and killed. Okay. So this is the story. And we read about this in the Haggadah, which is famous, that the Pharaoh took all the Jewish boys and he threw them in the Nile River. We're going to try to understand a little bit of what's going on over here. So for that, we turn to Rashi. Rashi is the commentary who gives us some insight over here. The first thing we're going to do is, who are these midwives? The Torah says these midwives, the Torah gives us names for the midwives. Shifra and Pua. One's name was Shifra, one's name was Pua. It says Rashi, Shifra and Pua, you know who these women were? They weren't actually Shifra and Pua. That wasn't their name. What was their name? Their name was Pasuk Tezvav in Rashi. Shifra zu Yocheved. This is Yocheved. Yocheved was the mother of Moses. Why was she called Shifra? Because she perfected, she beautified the child. That's why she was called Shifra, from the word of perfection and beautification. Pua, who was Pua zu Miriam? This refers to Miriam, the sister of Moses. Because she would talk to and chat with the child. What we would call today, she was a baby whisperer. What does that mean? She would say little sounds and make noises for the newborn to try to calm the newborn down. So that's why the Torah calls them Shifra and Pua. So Shifra and Pua, says Rashi, weren't actually Shifra and Pua. They were actually Yocheved and Miriam. Fast forward to the end of the story. How does the Torah end this story? This part of the Egyptian exile story, that the midwives didn't listen to the Pharaoh. They were God-fearing, and what did God give them? God rewarded them. What did God give them? Houses. What does it mean God gave them houses? I mean, literally, it means houses. What does this mean? When God gave them a house, what does that mean? So Rashi says, you know what this means? Batim, God gave them houses. This refers to Bate Kohuna Olivia, the houses of the priesthood and the Levites, Umalchus and kingship. Shekruim Batim, they're called houses. And Rashi goes on to quote from different verses how the Kohuna, priesthood, the Leviad, and the Malchus, kingship, are all in different verses called and referred to as Beis Hashem, the house of God, and Beis HaMelech, the house of the king. So all Jewish priests, Levites, and kings come from Yocheved and or Miriam. So now we understand what God did. Now we understand there was a reward. Why did God reward these midwives? Is that they would mother the leadership of the Jewish people. Okay. But here's the question. The question is like this. Rashi's job, according to his own self-proclaimed commentary, Rashi's job is to give you explanation where there's difficulty, simple layman's difficulty with a layman's explanation. Not to overcomplicate anything over here. Not to make things sophisticated. Sophistication is not part of Rashi's repertoire. That's for others to do. So when we read the Torah, and the Torah says that there were two Jewish midwives. One name was Shifra, and one's name was Pua. Rashi comes along and says Shifra wasn't Shifra, was Yocheved. Pua wasn't Pua, was Miriam. Who asked you, Rashi, to get involved over here? In other words, what if we didn't have Rashi, we would say it means literally Shifra and Pua. And what's wrong with that? Of course, there's interpretation, there's other ways of learning it. But there's no question here that needs an explanation. Their name was Shifra, the name was Pua. Beautiful. Thank you, Torah. We know the names. Now we move on. And the same thing is when it comes to the reward. God gave them houses. Now, generally speaking, in Judaism, there's something called Ish Ubeisai, a man and his home. A man and his home means a man and his family. Sometimes we refer to a family as bias, my home. So if the Torah says that God blessed them, rewarded them with batim, with homes, we would simply explain this to mean with nice, large, successful families. That's what it would mean. Comes Rashi and says, no, don't think like that. I got a better interpretation. Why do we need interpretation? What's the problem here that needs interpretation? God rewarded them with healthy, big families. That's great. That's a nice reward. No. You know what it means? It means God blessed them that they would mother the priests and the Levites and the kings of the Jewish people. And I bring you scriptural verses to prove that priests, Levites, and kings are called home. They're a reference with the word home as well. So we can make it work. Fine, you can make it work. But what's bothering you over here, Rashi? What's prompting you to walk away from the simple reading? Usually you're the one that loves the simple stuff. You're the one that gives us the simple stuff. And over here, Rashi seems to be completely reverse. He's the one that's complicating things. He's the one that's pulling interpretations that aren't clear in the verse. They're nicely extrapolated, but it's not actually the translation of the simple reading. Shifra and Pua is their names, and Bata means families. So why would Rashi do this? How do we make sense of what's going on over here with Rashi? This needs a little bit of decoding. We have to decode what's going on. But in order to decode what's going on, we have to get to the content over here. And let's understand, because there's a very, very, very big problem with the whole story. This whole story that the Torah tells us, a 5-year-old child, a young, new, fresh to Torah, never read any Torah before. I open up the story of Exodus and I start reading the first 10 verses of Exodus and I say, 1 second. The Pharaoh called in 2 Jewish midwives and said that all the Jewish boys that are going to be born, you should kill. What? 2 midwives for a whole nation? I mean, like, what? What are you talking about? You go to the hospital over here, and 2 midwives aren't enough for one hospital. That's just in one neighborhood. You're talking over here about a whole nation of Jews. How is it possible that 2 women take care of everybody? It's not possible. But the Torah seems to be like a simple thing. No, he called in the 2 Jewish midwives and he said, kill them. No, they're always supposed to listen. Okay, no problem. Check, we'll kill them. It's physically impossible. The whole concept is a strange concept. It's like, where do we begin with such a thing? The Pharaoh called in 2 Jewish midwives, and they were supposed to be in charge of killing all of them, because there's as if they deliver every child born. It is physically impossible for anyone to do. Every delivery takes time. And on top of that, Rashi already says, the Torah says clearly that the Jewish people were fruitful and multiplied, and we scattered everywhere around the whole land. What does this mean? The Medrash says the Jewish women were giving birth to sextuplets. We're giving birth to 6 at a time. That's how we became so big so fast. I mean, when a mother gives birth to 1 child, it takes time, and you need a midwife there. You need a doctor there. When there's twins, it's a high risk pregnant. Triplets, even higher. 6 is not unheard of. Every doctor in the hospital is going to be there to deliver. You want to have all hands on deck. And here, every woman was giving birth to multiple children at one time, and we're supposed to use our imagination that 2 women were enough to deliver all these babies. Even in our imagination, it's impossible to come up with such an image. So how do we understand this at a simple level? How do we understand this? Now let's continue with the narrative. So they don't listen to the Pharaoh calls them in. And he says, why aren't you listening to me? But you would think they would respond. Why? Because he gave us a job. It's impossible. We did the 50 that we delivered, we killed. But the 3 million that we didn't deliver, we didn't kill. Well, what were you thinking, Pharaoh? They don't say that. What do they say? They say, not you don't understand, Pharaoh. Jewish women are not like the Egyptian women. Jewish women don't need a midwife. They know how to give birth on their own. They don't need any help. They're skilled, and they give birth without any help. You think this was a lie? This was the truth. No one would ever dare to say a lie that's so easily disproven. If the Jewish women actually needed midwives, if they needed help delivering their children, their babies, all the Pharaoh needed to do was go to the next Jewish woman that was going to give birth and see for himself that they couldn't do it on their own. Obviously, if they said this, it was 100% true. They're very confident in what they were saying. They would never, ever lie to the Pharaoh so blatant and so it's such a ridiculous thing to say if it wasn't true. Because it's so easily disproven. So if they said it, that means it was true. So if it was true that the Jewish women didn't need midwives, so what was their job? You can't have it both ways. Two aren't enough for everybody. And if nobody needs you, so then what's your role over here? Why are there Jewish midwives anyways? You just told me that they don't need any midwives. So who are you? Right? Both sides of the story don't make sense. And these are not complicated questions. These are not questions that even is addressed by anyone clearly over here. These are questions that are like, the whole story needs to be understood over here. We have to decode what the Torah is telling us over here. So how do we make sense of this? So in order to appreciate this, I think you have to understand many times today is the 14th day of the month of Teves. On the 5th day of the month of Teves, so 9 days ago, there was a big celebration held in Chabad. In Chabad, we call the 5th day of Teves the day of Didan Notzach, the day that we won. What was the background to this day? The background to this day in 1987, January 6th, 1987. Baby was born, my daughter was born January 6th. On January 6th, 1987, 38 years ago, on January 6th, the non-Jewish judge by the name of Charles Sifton, who's since passed, issued a ruling in favor of Chabad, saying that the library, all of the books that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe had accumulated and gathered over the course of his lifetime, belonged to the Chassidim. It belonged to Chabad Lubavitch. And it wasn't a personal inheritance. It wasn't a personal collection that his next of kin or his family can split as an inheritance. It was a big court case because there was a grandson of the previous Rebbe who claimed that he was an heir and therefore it belonged partially to him, and he can take it and do what he wants with it. And the Rebbe vehemently opposed and said this was never a personal collection. This was a collection on behalf of the community. And then the big question that needed to be decided in this court case was, what is a Rebbe and his relationship with the Chassid? What is this Chassid-Rebbe relationship? What role does the Rebbe play? And each side brought in experts, could give testimony in court to describe to a non-Jewish judge who had never heard of any of this stuff before, trying to explain what the relationship between the Chassid and the Rebbe is. So on Hey Teves, the 5th of Teves, the judge ruled that everything belonged to Chabad, the community. So it became a big, big celebration in Chabad. They celebrated for 7 days. And then the Rebbe put an end to that 7 days celebration, and then everyone went back to school. And the Rebbe spoke a number of times about the day has to be connected with books and buying books and studying books and binding books, and it's all about the books, the books, the books. With the Jewish people are the people of the book, and the Rebbe was, every book is a part of the life of its author. So when you study the book, you're becoming connected with the author, and that's the way the author lives on. So the Rebbe lives on through his books. As long as the books are here, that means the Rebbe is here. And if the books are stolen, or if they're being held in captivity somewhere, that means that the Rebbe is being held in captivity over there. And the Rebbe spoke a lot about this before, during, and after. And there's still part of the collection is still stolen by the Russian government and being held by the Russian government in Russia, not being returned to Chabad Lubavitch library, which is a big problem. And they're working on trying to get it back for the last 30 plus years. But so far, they've been unsuccessful. So why do I say this? I say this because there's a certain appreciation that you can understand of a relationship between a brother and a sister, a brother and a brother, two brothers, two sisters, a parent and a child, a husband and a wife, a grandparent, a grandchild, friends, co-workers, a boss. In all types of relationships that we have, there's a certain appreciation that these relationships have a certain type of value. There's a certain type of connection that exists between the two people in the relationship, and many different levels, right? Each one is not the same. You can love many people, but the relationship, the bond that you have with the parent is not the same bond that you have with the sibling. It's not the same bond that you have with a best friend. They're all three important, but they're not all three the same. So what's the bond between a chassan and a rebbe? What's that connection? It's something that's very hard to define, because it's like a parent and a best friend in one, and plus more than that as well. But without getting into trying to describe exactly the nuances of it, I'm going to share with you a way of life of a chassid. The way of life is based off of a connection to the Rebbe. The way of life goes like this. Any time in my life when I'm faced with a difficulty, the difficulty could be that it exists right now in front of me, or I'm worried about something that may happen in the future. I'm anxious. I'm feeling under pressure for whatever reason, either now or in a little bit it will come to be. A chassid turns to the Rebbe and asks the Rebbe for a blessing. Should I go into this investment? Should I pull out of this investment? Should I get married? Should I get married to this person or not? I would like a blessing before I go ahead. Before you propose, I want a blessing. How did Chassidim get married? How did Chassidim get engaged? You know how Chassidim got engaged? They wrote into the Rebbe. And if the Rebbe gave a blessing, that means you're engaged. The most important decision in your life, I tell people, the most important decision in your life that you ever make is the person who you marry. If you get that decision right, all other decisions are much easier to make. If you make that decision wrong, if you get that wrong, everything else in life is going to be ruined also. So the most important decision that a chassid is going to make, who I should marry. How did I decide? They decided, they wrote into the Rebbe. Of course, you have to meet the person. This wasn't in the dark. We don't just throw darts at the board. But after you met the person, if you thought that there was something there to talk about, and you wrote it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave his blessing, that was it. You didn't need anything else. It was a done deal for a chassid. Nothing else is more important, and nothing else will ever convince me more. I'm 100% reliant on the blessing of the Rebbe. The Rebbe is my spiritual guide. He's my moral support. He's my everything. So before a chassid did anything of consequence in their life, they would ask the Rebbe. And if the Rebbe didn't respond, They were in turmoil. They were anxious. They didn't know what to do. Why is the Rebbe not responding to me? A real chassid, after the Rebbe responds, whatever it is, follows through with this as if it's a clear directive from God. There's nothing else. I don't need anything else. Comes along Rashi, and Rashi is troubled in our story over here by the very question that we asked. How is it possible that two women can be the midwives for an entire nation? It's not possible. So therefore, Rashi follows the following logic. That these two midwives weren't actual midwives. They weren't the people to deliver the babies. The proof is the Jewish women didn't need midwives to help them deliver the babies. The Torah already says that to us, or says it to us a few verses later. So the Jews never needed help delivering. What did the Jews need help with? The Jews needed help with a spiritual guide. I'm going to give birth to 6 babies at once. Is there anything more nerve-wracking in your possibly life for a woman than that? You know, a woman finds out that she's pregnant. There's a certain level of excitement, but there's also nerves. Twins, the nerves are double. You know, it's something like such a high-risk thing. They can't live. They're so anxious for 9 months. They're anxious. The anxiety level is through the roof. What calms down such a person? A person in such a circumstance. You need to have an outside person who you 100% trust, but there isn't such a person. The doctor says everything. Thank you, the doctor. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You calmed me down a little bit, but it didn't really soothe all my nerves. But when the Rebbe tells it to you, if you're a follower, if you're a chassid of the Rebbe, I don't need anything else. I know everything is going to be good. So when the Pharaoh calls in the 2 Jewish midwives, the Jews had 2 Jews. They weren't the people that were the people that delivered the babies. They were the 2 people who were like the Rebbitzins. They were the spiritual guidance counselors. They were the Rebbitzins of the Jewish nation. That all the Jewish women knew that if there's ever a problem, if there's ever a need, if there's ever a question, you turn to them. They'll be there for you. They'll help you get through it. They were the greatest moral support of the Jewish people. And for that, you don't need to have more. One Rebbe could take care of a whole nation. Over here, the Torah says you have 2. Fine. But we understand now how it's possible. Because they weren't physically delivering anybody. Maybe in certain cases, someone asked, can you come help me? Maybe. But that wasn't really their role. Their primary role was the one of being a spiritual leader, mentor, and guide for all of the Jewish women. The Pharaoh doesn't know this. What does the Pharaoh know about these things? The Pharaoh, expect the Pharaoh to know about what a Rebbitzin is and what the role the Rebbitzin plays in the community with the ladies. It's not possible. He lives in a different reality. That was the big miracle of Hey Tavis, that the non-Jewish judge gave such a ruling. Even the non-Jewish judge was able to appreciate after listening to all the testimony. He was able to appreciate such a thing. But the Pharaoh, he was busy worried about the Jews. He's going to be able to appreciate the nuance of what these women, how they heard they were midwives. He called them and he said, you kill them. So they come back and they say, you don't understand. That's not our role. You got it all wrong. You want to know why we didn't kill them? It's not our role because we don't deliver the kids. We're not there for the birth. We're never there for the birth. You got it all wrong. You have a misunderstanding over here. The Jewish women don't have midwives to deliver. They do that on their own. Based on this, now let's get back to the question, the original question we asked. The Torah gives us a name for all these people, who these Rebbitzins were. One's name was Shifra, and one's name was Pur. Now, you would think the Torah is introducing to us over here 2 Rebbitzins, 2 leaders. of the Jewish nation that literally held the hand of the Jewish mothers throughout the darkest times in Egypt. Shifra and Pur, beautiful. Who's Shifra and Pur? Where do we have any reference? Look, give a look in the whole book of Genesis. Who's Shifra? Where do these people come from? After, give a look in the rest of the Chumash. Who are they? In other words, they're so important. They're so holy. They're such holy women. How could we? Where do they come from? Who were their parents? What tribe? How do they connect back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? We have no reference to anything. This question is what prompts Rashi to say that Shifra and Pur weren't names, they were descriptions. Because we don't find anywhere anyone called Shifra and Pur in the Torah. Certainly not people that we would have to know about them. They're such holy women, we would have to know about them. So Rashi says, you got to understand, Shifra and Pur is a description of who these people were, not the name of who the people were. Shifra means someone who mishaperes, someone who beautifies a baby. Pur means a baby whisperer. That's what it means. These are descriptions of these people did. You want to know who they were? They were the leaders of the Jewish people at the time. Yocheved and Miriam. Now we know who they are. So what makes Rashi go away from, deviate from the usual practice of taking on the literal meaning is too many questions in the literal story. The literal story is just flooded with questions that are so powerful that leads us to, the Torah is forcing us and steering us to understand who these women were. So we had one final question. What was the final question that we asked? The reward. Why did Rashi now, when it comes to the reward, walk away from the simple meaning, which was that God blessed them with houses, meaning healthy and big families? So if you give a look in the Chumash and you follow the story, the Jewish people, the Torah says more than once, were fruitful, multiplied, growing. Egyptians were scared of us. We were scattered everywhere. We're a strong people. Giving birth to 6 at one. Now I ask you the simple question. If God would bless Yocheved with a big family, would that be anything unique? Everyone had a big family then. All the Jews were being blessed with a big family. That's what the Torah just told us. Everyone was having a lot of kids. You just told us everyone was having a lot of kids. So what's the big deal that God's going to bless them also with a lot? That's not a reward for what they did. They stood up to the Pharaoh. Now God's blessed. It can't be that. So you have to figure now, what could it be? What could it possibly be? So there's two things that you have to be able to, two tools you need to use in order to come up with the answer to this question. Number one, we know this is a reward from God. So it has to be something that God would reward them with, which I'll explain to you in a second how that works. And number two, it has to be something that fits the word. You have to find a reference, and biblical reference for this reward that goes with the word house, because the Torah does use the word house. So we have to have some type of reference to house connected with that as well. How does God reward? When it comes to reward, how does God reward? So the idea when Hashem rewards is always midah kineged midah, measure for a measure. Always God is a measure for a measure. Commensurate with your behavior, that's the way God responds in kind. What was the role that these two Jewish women served? They weren't the ones who delivered the babies, we said. We already established that would be impossible. Their role was as spiritual guides. They were the motivators. They were the encouragers. They were the moral support of the Jewish women during those difficult days. So when it comes time to reward, God rewards in kind. Rewarding in kind would be God would bless them to mother the future spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. not the people that help you out in your home, not the people that help you out when you're sick. The spiritual leaders, the priests, the Levites, the kings, these were the people that served their nation from the outside, in the temple, in the palace. They're there, but not as anything greater than just people that are in positions that God appointed them to be the representatives of the community. That's what the Kohen and the Levi and the king are all about. Representatives of the community. What did they represent? They represented a link, a connection with God that was more intense, more focused than the average ordinary citizen because they were too busy doing other things. Whereas the Kohen and the Levi, they were forbidden from doing a lot of the work. They had special rules and regulations for them and their behaviors in order to discipline them, in order to keep them in their connection with Hashem as representatives of the Jewish people. So this is exactly the type of work that Yocheved and Miriam did. They were the spiritual leaders. They were there to support and help the community, represent the community, be there. If anyone had a question, if anyone had a problem, they turned to me. So too Hashem said you're going to get it. But it doesn't work. You can't just pull it out of your hat. Although it makes sense. For that, Rashi has to bring biblical verses. To back it up, he brings biblical verses to help him buttress his point, how we do find in different places that we refer to the priesthood, the tribe of Levi, and the kingship with the word bias, with the word house. Okay. This is one. I was going to go to another idea also. Maybe we'll do it quickly. This is one decoding of one part of the story. We'll jump quickly to chapter number 5. I think this. If anyone any question on this part of the story before we go further. Okay. You jump to chapter number 5 over here. This now goes to where God already appoints Moses to be with Aaron to go to the Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. So they gather the Jews, the Torah says, and they tell them that God is going to redeem them and everything is great. Then they come to the Pharaoh and they tell the Pharaoh, let my people go and they'll worship me in the desert. The Pharaoh says, who is the God that I should listen to him to send the Jewish people out? I never heard of this God and I'm not sending the Jews out. So they tell him, the God of the Jews appeared to us and they told us that he should let us go for 3 days to the desert and over there we're going to bring sacrifices to Hashem. Chapter 5, verse number 4 says the Pharaoh back to them. He says like this: and the king of Egypt said to them, Loma Moshe Aaron tafriyos. Why, Moshe and Aaron, do you disturb the people from their work? L'chu lesiv lo yisechem. Go and deal with your burdens. Then Vayemer Pare Hi Nab Mata Amoretz, and the Pharaoh said, the people landed very numerous, and you are suggesting that they rest from their work. And he said, we're going to double down. We're going to give them even more work to do. And this causes what we thought up until now was bad. The Jews really have it worse. After Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, the story turns even worse for the Jews. Till it gets better, it gets much, much, much worse. Okay. Now, focus on 2 words over here in verse number 4. The last 2 words seemingly are extra. The Pharaoh is telling Moses and Aaron, why do you want to disturb the people from their work? Period. Why does he add the words, go deal with your own problems, with your own troubles, with your own burdens, he says. What does that even mean? What was their burdens? What was the burdens of Moshe and Aaron? So Rashi tells us, go to do the work that you're supposed to be doing in your homes. Now, Why is Rashi saying this to us? What do you think? What do you think it means? If I tell you the story that the Jewish people were all enslaved to the Pharaoh in Egypt, Moses and Aaron came to the Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." The Pharaoh said, "Why do you want to disturb the people from their work? Go to your own burdens." What do you think those words, "go to your own burdens," mean?
They're also slaves.
They were also slaves. In other words, you have a job to do like everyone else. What are you coming here? Go get back to work. Says Rashi, no, that's not what it means. No. How do you know that's not what it means? Because the tribe of Levi were not enslaved. The proof is that Moses and Aaron were able to go and come from the Pharaoh whenever they wanted. No one can do that if you're a slave. So it must be that Moses and Aaron from the tribe of Levi, they were not slaves. Okay. Why weren't they slaves? Why wasn't the tribe of Levi slaves? So the Ramban says, and others learn as well, that the Pharaoh was in line with many, many other cultures and leaders who understood that the Jewish people and every nation, every religion, and every group needs to have a section, a group within them that are the spiritual teachers. You have to have priests among all nations. So therefore, the Pharaoh said, I recognize that among the Jewish people, there's going to be a group of people that are going to be dedicating their lives to the connection with God, to their spiritual service. So the tribe of Levi was designated as the ones. They never signed up for work in the beginning, and therefore they were never enslaved. The Pharaoh never forced labor upon them because he respected, in Egypt, they always had a respect for the clergy. Yeah.
So this goes back to last week, right? Where you said some people are spiritual leaders and then some are more the activists in the community. Would you say that?
These are more, the answer is yes.
Like Jacob?
Yes. It's related to that because these people remained like Jacob. Although they were in Egypt, they never became part of the Egyptian culture. They never went to work in Egypt. They were always members of the clergy. They always were 1 foot out of Egypt and 1 foot in Egypt. They lived there, but their minds weren't there. So yes, Jacob-esque, as described last week. So the Ramban says this was something that was very normal. And all kings had such, in all nations had such a thing. It's called respect for the clergy. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago we learned that during the famine, when there was a famine in Egypt, and everyone had to sell them, or give all their money to Joseph for food, and then they gave all their animals to food, they gave all their real estate to Joseph, and then they sold themselves as slaves to Joseph for food, except for the priests in Egypt. The non-Jews, the Egyptian priests, they got their food because the Pharaoh, there was a rule in Egypt, there was respect for the clergy, and therefore they didn't have to pay for food. They were given the food by the Pharaoh. So it was always a group of people. So the Pharaoh respected the group of Jews. You can have a group also that's what you would call the clergy, your rabbis, and therefore they don't have to go to work. They can do that. So when the Pharaoh now tells Moses and Aaron, go back to your own job, what's their job? What was the job of Moses and Aaron? Moses and Aaron's job was to study Torah, to study, right? And what did the clergy do? Their job is not just to study for themselves, but the clergy are there to provide spiritual guidance for the nation, right? In this case, teach the people the perspective of the Hebrews. That was the job of Moses and Aaron. So he tells them, go back to your work. What's your work? Go back to studying Torah, we'll call it. It's as if someone came along today and said, what do you do? I'm a big rabbi. I study all day Torah. Now I heard there's a problem. The Jews are facing a problem. The local government wants to tell them they can't. So he comes again. He said, what does it bother you? I'm not bothering you. Go back to your community. Go back to where you live and live how you want. It's not affecting you. This is not your business. I'll deal with them. But what are you mixing involved over here for? You have it off easy. You don't live the same life. What I say, go back to what you're doing. Go back to studying and teaching. So the fact that he says to your burden, to your job, this indicates that it was to the job, the role that you play. Don't disturb the people. Don't ask me to stop the work from the people and let them go. No. You guys have it good. Go back to yeshiva. That's what he told. And now you bothered everyone. Now you really, you struck a nerve for me anyway. So I'm gonna make it worse for them. The Zohar says that Egypt at that time represented the most progressive intellectual way of thinking. They were the most advanced intellectuals. They were very deep and sophisticated people, the Egyptians. Which means if the Pharaoh came up with such a claim to Moses, it must have been a logical claim. It makes sense. You listen to the Pharaoh, and if he told this to Moses now, it must be that it made a lot of sense. It was logically sound. This is what they should be doing, and they shouldn't be mixing into the rest of the Jewish people. After all, you guys have it well. But what do we see from the story? We see from the story that although it's true that the Pharaoh said this, and although it's true that it's a very good and righteous claim against Moses, Moses doesn't listen. Even though he had a good life himself. And Aaron has a good life, and the tribe of Levi all have good lives in Egypt because no one bothers them. They say, we're going to stick our nose and try to help our fellow brothers and sisters whose lives are being embittered by the Egyptian king, the Pharaoh, which teaches us a very important lesson in life. There are many Jews and rabbis and members of the clergy in some form or another who say to themselves, in Hebrew, Ani es nafshi hitzalti. I saved my own soul. In other words, my soul is doing just fine what I'm doing. There's another Jew who has a problem. There's another Jew who's going through difficulty. It's their problem to figure out. They need my help. Okay, so every once in a while, I'll provide them with a little bit of help and assistance from the outside. But I'm not going to go and leave my comfort and invest myself fully in this uncomfortable task to try to make their life better. Says Moses to the Pharaoh, I could care less what you have to say. It's not a debate of logic. When a house is on fire, the fire's in LA right now, right? There's thousands of firefighters trying to put out the flames. Thousands and thousands and thousands of homes destroyed, up in flames. You think a firefighter before he goes and he sees a home on fire, someone's in there, he asks questions. What type of person lives inside the house? But maybe they have a very good question to ask. Maybe they can ask a question. Maybe the person deserves to go up in flames. I should go and try to rescue them. I don't know who they are. Maybe they're not even a good person. What do you tell such a firefighter? A firefighter would say such a thing to you. You're fired immediately. Why? Because when there's a fire, you don't ask questions. If you can help, if you can be of assistance, you stop what you're doing and you run in and you help them. And you don't need to be a firefighter for that. Any person, any healthy and normal human being, if he sees somebody else's house is up in flames and I can be of any form of help, I go and I help them regardless of who they are. It's not a time for questions now. The Pharaoh and his logic is perfect to debate in the yeshiva. You come to yeshiva and we'll have a good debate. But when the home is burning, there's not time for debate. All the logic goes right out the window. The only thing that matters is, can I help you? How can I help you? What should I do? I'm going to run in, even if it means I'm going to get a little dirty. I'm going to go and try to rescue. And that's what Moshe and Aaron teaches us in the 6th parsha over here. The Pharaoh says, what are you doing? What are you making yourself dirty for? You're going to get for your smoke inhalation. You're going to get yourself sick. It's not for you. You guys have a good life. good spiritual life, you're doing just fine in Egypt. Moshe Aaron tell them, it doesn't work that way. As long as my people are being enslaved in Egypt and you're torturing their life, I'm going to do whatever I could to help them, even if I'm going to make a fool out of myself in your eyes. You'll think I'm an idiot. That's fine with me. It doesn't bother me for that you think I'm an idiot if I'm going to be able to make one dent, one iota of improvement to help them out. And when it doesn't work, when the Pharaoh makes it more difficult for the Jews, now Moshe Rabbeinu turns to God and he says, whoa, how does this make sense now? I was asked to go and run into the fire. I was asked to go and try to help whatever I could, and I'm ready to do it. I didn't want to, but you enlisted me and I was ready to do it. The Pharaoh tells me I'm an idiot. I told the Pharaoh I could care less what you think about me. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But now the whole plan is blowing up because he's making it worse for the Jewish people. He made the labor more intense. He now made it almost impossible for them. So God, tell me, how does this go down? That's how we end the parsha this week, with this question. And next week, Hashem responds to Moshe Rabbeinu. Tell Moshe Rabbeinu how to handle this question that he has. But we end off with the question in this week's parsha. Question of Moshe Rabbeinu is this question, this precise question. But you only have this question if you're able to act like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not a big deal to sit on the outside and be a spectator and say, oh, look at this, it's like a game. Two people. God, how could you do this to that person? They're such a nice person. How could you do it to them? No big deal to ask the question like that. The question is a real question when you try to help them. And you stop what you're doing. And you put yourself in an uncomfortable position. And go ahead and you help them. And now, after you go and help them, instead of their position turning for the better, it ends up turning for the worse. Now you turn to God and say, whoa, why is this? Why is this the right thing to happen? That's a serious question that Moshe Rabbeinu says, and has to be addressed by God in the beginning of next week's parsha. But the takeaway from this is two things. Number one is we see from this how the way you study Torah, the way one studies Torah over in the Chumash, we read the story once, you read a Rashi, and we take things for granted, but there's so many different pieces that are moving that we're not aware of. We have to draw our attention. We need some help to understand all of these things. That's number one. Number two is everything, especially when it comes to Rashi, is very precise. And those things that he explains and the way he explains it is reasons for everything. That's all in terms of understanding the Chumash and narrative of the story in the beginning of with the midwives and everything, and the reward for the midwives and everything. But out of that story comes also an idea that we have to understand that Hashem treats us measure for measure. Everything is commensurate with our behavior. And if we do something positive, every positive deed has a reward. And the reward that it has is exactly in the same form of the behavior that we're doing. The action that we're doing gives birth to a similar positive in our life as well. And that's what we have to focus on. So if we help other people, God makes sure that we're helped in our way as well. The things that we need help with. We are there to be facilitators of good for our friends, for our neighbors, for our families. And Hashem makes sure that we have everything that we need and facilitates for us on our behalf as well to further that in our family, in our life. Anyone have any questions? And of course, we learn from the end of the parsha how this commitment has to be, even though maybe someone who's smart has a good question, make fun of us, and they may be right. Sometimes it's not a matter of being right or wrong right now. That we'll save for another day. All I have to worry about is getting the job done and making sure to put out the fire, to rescue my fellow Jew, to help them with whatever it is that they need. Anyone